There is a version of loneliness that has no obvious cause, no loss, no rejection, no grief you can point to, just the persistent quiet sensation that you are watching a conversation from behind glass, close enough to hear it, too far away to actually be in it. People who score at the extreme end of the IQ distribution know this feeling well. Not because they have been told about it, but because they have lived inside it for most of their lives without ever having a name for it. Here is the paradox that almost no one discusses. The same cognitive architecture that allows an exceptionally intelligent person to perceive patterns others miss, to process complexity with unusual ease, to see 10 moves ahead in any situation. That same architecture is precisely what makes ordinary human connection feel so effortful, so structurally asymmetrical that it begins to feel impossible. Intelligence, at its extreme, is not a superpower layered on top of a normal life. It is a lens that fundamentally reshapes every social experience you will ever have. And the world is not always designed to accommodate lenses that are powerful. This is not a story about genius. It is a story about what happens to a mind that runs faster than the culture around it can follow, and what it costs. We need to understand the mathematics of rare intelligence, because the numbers themselves tell a story that most people have never been given access to. An IQ of 100 is, by definition, the population average. An IQ of 115 puts you in the top 16%. An IQ of 130, the threshold for Mensa membership, places you in the top 2% of the entire human population. That sounds like a manageable level of difference. 2% is still millions of people. You are unusual, but not cosmically so. The numbers change dramatically as you move further along the distribution. An IQ of 145 places you in the top 0.1%, meaning only one person in every 1,000 shares your cognitive profile. At 160, you are operating at a statistical frequency so rare that in a random gathering of 10,000 people, you might find one or two others in your range. This is not hyperbole. It is basic population statistics, and it has profound implications for something as fundamental as who you can talk to. The SMPY longitudinal study, the study of mathematically precocious youth, conducted over 35 years by Vanderbilt researchers David Lebensky and Camilla Bent-Bow, tracked thousands of individuals who scored in the top 1% of cognitive ability from adolescence into middle age. What they found was unambiguous. Early intellectual talent does predict adult achievement in concrete, measurable terms. Patents filed, income earned, leadership positions held. The myth that gifted children always burn out, or that early potential rarely translates, is, according to 5 decades of longitudinal data, largely false. But here is what that data cannot fully capture: what happens inside. What it feels like to be that rare dot in the 1920s and 1930s. A Columbia University psychologist named Leta Hollingworth became the first researcher to rigorously study what happens to children who score at the extreme upper end of the intelligence distribution. What she found was not what most people would expect. She found loneliness, not as a side effect, not as an incidental outcome. As a structural inevitability, Hollingworth proposed what became known as the communication range, a concept that has since become one of the most quietly devastating insights in the psychology of intelligence. The idea is this: human beings can communicate naturally and comfortably with others who fall within approximately 30 IQ points of themselves. Within that range, conversation flows, humor lands, references connect, and the general pace of thinking aligns closely enough that both people feel genuinely met. Once you exceed that 30-point gap, something begins to fracture. The person with the higher IQ starts simplifying, translating, slowing down. The person with the lower score starts feeling patronized, confused, or simply bored. Neither person is doing anything wrong. The architecture just does not align. Now, consider what this means for a person with an IQ of 160. Their natural communication range, the zone in which they can interact without constant, exhausting translation, encompasses less than 3% of the entire human population. Mathematically, isolation is not a risk for them. It is the default setting. Hollingworth's famous observation still resonates: isolation is the refuge of genius, not its goal. They do not choose it. They are pushed into it by arithmetic. For a long time, The conversation about high IQ and health was straightforwardly positive. Smarter people, on average, make better health decisions, are less likely to be involved in accidents, and have a statistically reduced risk of cardiovascular disease. Data from the UK Biobank and other large-scale studies confirm that higher childhood IQ is associated with a 20 to 25% reduction in accident-related injuries and heart disease risk. Intelligence, when measured against the general population, tends to protect the body. But researcher Ruth Kerpinski of Pitzer College began to look more carefully at the very far end of the distribution, specifically at members of Mensa, the High Q Society, and what she found complicated the picture considerably. In a 2017 study published in the journal Intelligence, Kerpinski and her colleagues found that Mensa members reported significantly elevated rates of mood and anxiety disorders, ADHD, autism spectrum conditions, and immune dysregulation compared to the general population. To explain this, Kerpinski proposed what she called the hyperbrain/hyperbody theory. The core idea is that a brain wired for high-speed, high-intensity cognitive processing does not operate in isolation from the nervous system that houses it. That same neural excitability, the overclocked processing speed, the hyper-awareness of patterns and anomalies, tends to produce a nervous system that is equally overreactive. The mind notices everything. The body responds to everything. Anxiety becomes not a disorder imposed from outside, but an almost logical consequence of processing the world at a frequency the environment was never designed to support. The overactive brain and the overreactive body are, in Kerpinski's framing, not two separate problems. They are one system running at a cost. There is a developmental phenomenon in profoundly gifted children that rarely makes it into popular conversation, but which shapes the adult psychology of highly intelligent people in ways that are still being understood. Leta Hollingworth observed it in her case studies decades ago. Gifted children develop unevenly. Their intellectual capacities surge forward at a rate the rest of their development cannot match. A child of 5 with an IQ of 160 can intellectually grasp the concept of mortality, the finality of death, the randomness of suffering, the scale of geological time. Their cognitive engine can process these realities with clarity, but their emotional architecture, their capacity to regulate what those realizations feel like, is still the emotional architecture of a 5. They understand things they are not yet equipped to carry. They ask questions that the adults around them cannot answer. And when no answer comes, when no adult can hold the weight of what this child is asking, the child learns something quietly devastating. They are alone with what they know. This asynchronous development, where the mind races ahead and the emotional self tries desperately to keep pace, does not simply resolve with age. For many gifted individuals, it calcifies into a pattern. They become extraordinarily capable at intellectual analysis and quietly underprepared for the felt experience of being human. They can explain grief before they can survive it. They can articulate loneliness with precision while being unable to dissolve it. The wound is not in what they know. It is in how far out ahead of themselves they were forced to travel. If you grew up being called the smart one, if teachers flagged you early, if adults marveled at your vocabulary, if you moved through school without having to try very hard, there is a specific kind of collapse that awaits you. Somewhere in early adulthood, not dramatic, not sudden, just a slow erosion of the identity you were handed as a child, because that identity was never stress-tested. Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck spent decades studying what happens to children who are praised for their intelligence rather than their effort. What she found was unsettling. Children told they are smart tend to develop what she called a fixed mindset, the implicit belief that their intelligence is a static trait, something they either have or do not have. Because their identity is built around being smart, they begin to avoid challenges where they might fail. Failure for them is not just an outcome, it is a verdict on who they are. The result, as Dweck documented across multiple studies, is a generation of hypotential individuals who are extraordinarily capable in low-risk environments and psychologically brittle in high-stakes ones. They were not taught how to fail. They were not taught how to struggle productively. They were taught that intelligence arrives effortlessly, and that anything requiring real work must mean they were not as gifted as everyone believed. The gifted kid burnout that millennials and Gen Z describe with such recognition online is not simply anecdotal. It is the long-term behavioral consequence of being given an identity instead of a skill set and discovering. Too late, that identity alone cannot survive contact with a demanding world. Culture is deeply invested in the narrative of the tortured genius, the brilliant artist, the mathematician on the verge of madness, the visionary who cannot function socially. This archetype appears in films, novels, and biographical profiles with such regularity that it has become inseparable from how society understands exceptional intelligence. The assumption embedded in this cultural story is that high intelligence and psychological suffering are naturally, almost romantically linked. The empirical record is considerably less dramatic. Large-scale population data, including studies drawing from the UK Biobank, one of the most comprehensive longitudinal health databases in existence, shows that higher childhood IQ is, in the vast majority of cases, associated with better mental health outcomes, not worse ones. Smarter people are statistically less likely to develop PTSD. They are less prone to impulse control disorders. They tend to have better coping strategies, stronger problem-solving frameworks, and a greater capacity to seek and utilize support when it is available. The tortured genius narrative is not simply inaccurate. It is a selective story, one that takes a small subset of extreme cases, many of them historical figures whose mental health went entirely untreated, and generalizes that experience to the entire range of high intelligence. The psychological reality is more nuanced and, for most gifted people, more quietly hopeful. The problems, when they do arise, tend to be specific, structural, and concentrated at the very far tail of the distribution, not evenly distributed across everyone who scores above average. Hollingworth's research did not only document the costs of extreme intelligence, it also identified something that, in retrospect, reads almost like a map. Through her case studies and observational work, she identified a range of IQ, approximately 125 to 155, that she called the optimal adjustment range. This is the zone she believed produced the most well-rounded, socially integrated, and professionally effective individuals. The reasoning is instructive. A person in this range is intelligent enough to perceive complexity and lead others through it. They are capable enough to solve problems that most people cannot. But they are not so far removed from the statistical center of the population that communication becomes structurally broken. They are still within the natural communication range of roughly 20 to 30% of the people they will encounter in daily life. They can explain their thinking in ways that land. They can follow the humor, the logic, the references of a wide enough swath of human experience that they do not feel perpetually alien. This is not a consolation prize for people who did not score higher. It is a genuinely important insight into how social integration and intellectual capacity interact. The person at IQ 170 may see further, but the person at IQ 140 may be better positioned to bring others along on what they see, and that difference, in a social species, matters enormously. Leadership, relationships, creative collaboration, community. These are not solved by raw cognitive power. They are solved by the capacity to think clearly and be understood. And those two requirements do not always point in the same direction. There is a category of depression that does not fit neatly into clinical frameworks. It is not caused by chemical imbalance, trauma history, or life circumstance in any obvious way. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the psychology of how we live and heal.